In this corner, we've got the master of mastication, the master debater and educator, the stoogie of the bougie, Jordan Peterson! And in the other corner, you've got that champion of the work camp peons, combaster for the underclassers, pal of the working gal, Karl Marx!
Part 2, Jordan Peterson is wrong. And this part, we discuss Jordan Peterson's claim that Marx started the fire, that Karl Marx is to blame for everything. So, we'll see. If you like this, please like and subscribe. As a matter of fact, even if you don't like it, please like and subscribe. It won't cost you anything. Click that little button, do an old man a favor, okay? All right, so, and try a free trial subscription to Skillshare. Link below. You can explore online classes, design, illustration, photography, writing, other forms of creativity, and more. Not just more, but more! And again, the links are below. Thank you. So in the following clip, we'll see Dr. Pete blame Marx for everything. Let's see what he has to say.
What I did instead was return to what I regarded as the original cause of all the trouble, let's say, which was the Communist Manifesto.
Well, this is kind of a vague sentence, isn't it? It sounds like Dr. Pete is saying that until Marx, everything was hunky-dory. Everything was copacetic. There was no class conflict, no conflict at all in the whole world until Marx came along and spoiled everything. But we have to ask a couple questions. What does original cause mean? Because that's what he says. Marx was the original cause. That Marx started the conflict between the classes, as in conflict never existed before, or that he was the first one to point out the conflict was there, that everybody had just ignored. Nobody had ever noticed before, like the proverbial elephant in the middle of the room, only in this case it was the elephant under the rug. And what does all the trouble mean? Workers complaining that they don't have enough to eat, that their working conditions are too dangerous, people not knowing their places and staying in their places. Okay, so we'll examine some of these claims. And as we do, remember what Dr. Pete himself said.
And to read something, you don't just follow the words and follow the meaning, but you take apart the sentences and you ask yourself at this level of phrase and at the level of sentence and at the level of paragraph, is this true? I've rarely read a tract that made as many errors per sentence, conceptual errors per sentence, as the Communist Manifesto.
And what we're going to do in the following video is apply Dr. Pete's own medicine to his own words. What did Dr. Pete say about examining paragraphs, sentences, phrases, words for the truth value? Much less errors per sentence, okay? So let's apply the same method of critique that he proposed to his own words. And we will take his words seriously, okay? And as exactly and specifically as we possibly can, though sometimes that's not totally possible, but we'll give it a shot.
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
So, to give us a little background, the Communist Manifesto was published in 1848. That's almost 200 years ago, isn't it? Okay. It's an analysis of class struggle, the conflicts of capitalism, between the capitalist or owner class, that is what we now know as the 1%. Okay, he's talking about those who are extremely well off, those who own the major companies, and we'll get to what that would be in our time. But it would be people like Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, Elon Musk, who owns Tesla. It'd be people of this category. And workers on the other side, okay? Those who toil in the factories, those who work in our time in the Amazon fulfillment centers. And so Marx writes that the history of all hitherto existing society is a history of class struggles. That's his claim. That's Marx's claim. Whereas Dr. Pete says it all began, or all the troubles began with Marx. Marx says these class struggles have been going on throughout the history of society. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the history of class conflict. And I guess the first question we can ask is, did it all begin with Marx or not? Well, that was easy. Class struggle is not new. It's not an invention of Marx, okay? Marx himself says the specter of communism is rising across Europe. Okay, so in his text, he says this is already existing. So already, as he's writing his text, he's saying, I didn't invent this. It's already happening. So it didn't begin with him. He's just writing it down, right? And so the ideas that Marx espouses were already widespread as he was writing them. So Dr. Pete's wrong, but I'll go on even further. Before Marx wrote the Manifesto, there were many critiques of the capitalist system in Marx's own time. In 1832, a writer by the name of Pierre Leroux wrote that to recognize no other name than individualism is to deliver the lower classes to brutal exploitation. The proletariat is no more than a revival of antique slavery. So that is somebody who is writing, in this case, 16 years before Marx. Okay, so it didn't begin with Marx. But we can go back even further, and let's go back a long ways. So in Plato's Republic, that is his work, his piece of writing, he's writing about the perfect society about 2,500 years ago, long before Marx. What would that be? That would be about 2,300 years. So let's say round it to 2,000. Okay, I'm a rounding type of guy. So about 2,000 years before Marx, Socrates proposed that any city, however small, is in fact divided into two. One, the city of the poor, the other, the rich. And these are at war with one another. The rich and the poor, the society of the rich and the society of the poor are at war with another. That sounds like another word for class struggle. 2,000 years before Marx, so it didn't begin with Marx. And we can go on. In the Bible, okay, various books of the Bible written, around the year 1000, that would be the time that we have the story of Moses murdering an Egyptian overlord. So the Jews were slaves in Egypt and being brutally treated, and Moses came along. Remember Moses, who later led the Israelites out of Egypt, and murdered an Egyptian overlord for whipping a Jewish slave. That's a long time before Marx. There was class struggle in ancient Rome. There was something called the Servile War, which the slaves and working people in ancient Rome rose up against the ruling classes. And this is about 2,000 years ago. There's a massive slave revolt made famous several years ago by the movie Spartacus. I don't know if you remember seeing it, or if you've ever seen it. Famous scene where all the rebels are rounded up and they're threatened with death. And a very horrible death. The Romans used to put people to death, executed people, with crucifixion. As we read, they did to Jesus, which is a very cruel form of death, because somebody would be nailed, up on a cross, naturally, and then allowed to just die, expire. I mean, it took days and days, and so it was very, very terrible, very painful. Anyway, so the revolting slaves sacrificed themselves rather than give up Spartacus. And there's this famous scene where they stand up and says, I am Spartacus, no, I'm Spartacus, no, I'm Spartacus. And they all ended up being crucified. In the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, Edward Gibbon wrote that the plebeians of Rome had been oppressed from their earliest time, from the earliest time by the greed of the nobles, Class warfare, the greed of the nobles, that is the very higher class, the very highest class, oppressed the working classes. In the 1300s, I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and I don't want to bore you with this, but in a way I do, no, I hope you're interested. But just to illustrate how wrong Dr. Pete is, it didn't begin with Marx. In the 1300s, in England, rising taxes, economic discontent led to a revolt called the Peasants' Revolt. And one of the main grievances was the Statute of Laborers fixed a maximum wages. So it was a time of shortage of labor. It was after the Black Death, the bubonic plague, in which many people died in Europe, and so the 1%, fixed the maximum wage that somebody could earn, and the working classes didn't like that. They revolted. It doesn't stop there. There are labor struggles in America before Marx. Earliest recorded strike was in 1768 when tailors protested a wage reduction. Okay, their employers were trying to lower their wages for the very hard work that they were doing. Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, wrote that the great wealth in the hands of the minority resulted in a disharmonious society. He was already writing about disharmony that came about because of class conflict, class struggle. He says, where the wealth of the few excites the indignation of the poor, who are often driven by want and prompted by envy to invade the rich man's possession. Class struggle was inevitable, Smith wrote. The workmen desire to get as much and the masters to give as little as possible. Okay, so he says it's inevitable that there is this conflict. And I guess the implication of this is the more that what Smith calls the masters are able to take from the income of the poor, the more conflict there will be, because there comes a time that the poor are driven by what Smith called want, that is hunger, starvation. They don't have enough to live on to feed their families. Thomas Jefferson, we know Thomas Jefferson, right? Founding father. He noted the class struggle too. This in 1787, well before Marx. He saw massive class conflict in Europe. So Jefferson's looking over to Europe and he sees class conflict. They have divided their nation into two classes, wolves and sheep. And of course, what Jefferson's referring to, and this is a metaphor, of course, is that the wolves are eating the sheep. And so here we see a little picture with arrows. The rich are the wolves, and the poor are the sheep, and the wolves are eating the sheep. That sounds like class conflict to me, well before Marx. Marx didn't start this. And of course, we have the French Revolution. Inspired by the American Revolution, only it went a lot farther. It was a revolt of the middle and working classes against the aristocracy, against the 1%. And the French Revolution had communist elements in it, and they went so far as to actually execute many of the aristocracy. So, and we see pictures here, people being led up to the guillotine. That's that thing that comes down and chops people's heads off, right? It's that instrument, that machine. Okay, so that's how pissed off they were. Excuse my French. Appropriate, because we're talking about the French Revolution, right? So I use a French word. Okay, so, but they were really angry at the aristocracy. Now, we very often don't think about this, but the abuses of African/black slaves in the American South is an extreme form of class struggle. And I'll come back to this later because Dr. Pete says something else. that pertains to this, but the African slaves, the black slaves, were workers, okay? And they were abused and put down in the most extreme way, and gave rise to numerous slave revolts in the United States and elsewhere, because slavery existed all over the Americas, and most famously in the United States, the Rebellion of Nat Turner in 1831. Well before Marx, right? In which the slaves rose up and attempted to achieve their. For those who would argue, oh no, they were slaves, they couldn't be workers, they couldn't be classified as workers, there are many historians who see slave revolts as part and parcel of class struggle. W.E.B. Du Bois argued in Black Reconstruction that slaves are workers. They struggled with their masters over their working conditions, over their legal and social status, and the end game for any slave insurgency, any slave rebellion, was not only over the means of production and the output of production, a share of what they produced, but ownership over one's own self. And remember that those who would hold that these people were slaves, they weren't workers, that none of us really belong to just one group. We cannot be classified as being only one thing, only belonging to one group. So you're a worker, you're a parent, you're a male, female, Christian, white, African American, you might be mixed race, Asian, Hispanic, and so we all belong to different groups. And so it's possible for someone to have been a worker and a slave, and by all means, the slaves were workers, okay, which is just an extreme form of the classification of worker. Going further, the history of early capitalism is rife with abuses of workers by the 1%. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, many cases of abuse of workers, child labor, low wages, unsafe working condition, long hours. These are some of the things that Marx was referring to. Class struggles continued up through Marx's day and beyond. In 1892, there was a homestead strike in Pennsylvania. The Carnegie Steel Company was hugely profitable, and workers went on strike, and 12 people were killed. 12 people were killed. That sounds like a struggle to me. In 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory exposed poor working conditions amongst the workers. What happened was the factory caught on fire, and the owners of the building and the company had locked the doors, so the workers couldn't go out and take secret breaks. They couldn't take a break outside on the fire escape. Well, when the fire happened, those doors were locked, and people died. And that's in historical times. And what I want to get to, and what I'm working up to, is that the class struggle continues to this day. See, people even today are still struggling for a living wage, for decent working conditions. So, for instance, they're struggling to unionize at companies like Starbucks and Amazon. And those companies resist efforts to unionize. They resist the efforts of workers to achieve higher wages, to receive opportunities to support their families, themselves and their families. Struggles against companies like Uber that deny the status and protections of employee to drivers. And so what that means is that drivers are not classified as employees, so they don't receive unemployment benefits. They don't have protection against being fired. They certainly don't get health benefits. A lot of benefits that come to somebody just for being deemed an employee Well, Uber and companies like that fight classifying people that work for them as employees. Case just recently, Amazon warehouse workers killed during a tornado. They are denied permission to seek shelter, and I guess most egregiously, Jeff Bezos gave a party the day after warehouse workers died in a tornado that they couldn't shelter from. Walmart is famous for instigating a food stamp program and a welfare program for its own workers. There are many full-time employees at Walmart that qualify for welfare. So we as taxpayers are paying welfare benefits for full-time Walmart employees. This is a form of class struggle. Walmart increasing its profits, increasing the $1 billion of wealth of the owner family, of the Waltons who own Walmart, and on the backs of the poorly paid, poorly compensated workers at Walmart. More class struggle. McDonald's can't figure out how its workers survive on minimum wage. So here's an actual plan that was put forth for McDonald's workers to demonstrate how a McDonald's worker could support themselves and their families. And so they're offering to instruct the workers how to budget. So you'll notice a couple things. Well, one, they admit that working full-time at McDonald's cannot earn its workers enough money to get by on. So they slip in a second job. So you work 8 hours at McDonald's and then you go work your other 8-hour job at minimum wage. They insert $600 for rent. Now, someplace in the country, you might be able to rent a place to live for $600, but there's many cities in which a studio apartment runs for $1,000 to $2,000. And if you're trying to support a family, say you have a family of 2 kids, 3 kids, and you fit them all into a studio apartment, that's not anything to brag about. And you'll notice there's no heating expense allowed for. So if you live in a part of the country that gets cold, and many parts of the country get cold during the winter, that's why they call it winter, right? No money for heating. So just sit there and shiver. And then you'll notice one thing is missing on this tally, on this proposed budget for McDonald's workers. Now what is that? I think it's groceries. Okay, take a look at it. I've looked at it several times and I do not see a line item for groceries. So you're not supposed to eat if you're a McDonald's worker. This seems to be the very extreme of class struggle. Not acknowledging that your workers need to eat and their families need to eat and their children need to eat. So no. Dr. Pete is wrong. It didn't all start with Marx. Even if Marx had never written the manifesto, people would still notice that their children go hungry. They can't afford a place to live. Medical care is too expensive. So even without Marx, people would notice that some people are swimming in it while others...
Look where we at. Not a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of.
Even without Marx, people would notice that Amazon's Jeff Bezos has a $400 million yacht, and Amazon employees who pee in bottles because they don't get rent breaks. So we'd still notice these things, and the people who are working in the Amazon warehouses would notice them too. So don't tell me, and if I'm getting a little heated now, well, I am. Don't tell me that nobody would notice class struggle if Marx hadn't opened his big mouth. And let me just say that Marx discusses capitalism for the same reason that somebody talking about sports injuries today talks about football. Yes, there were head injuries before football. But then why link head injuries with playing football? Because that's the game we're playing now. So in ages gone by, in the days of the ancient pharaohs, there was no such thing as capitalism. So, we don't talk about capitalism in terms of the days of the ancient pharaohs when Moses killed the overlord, right? The Egyptian overlord, because there was no capitalism per se then. But we talk about capitalism now and the class struggles inherent in capitalism, or at least Marx does, because that's the game, that's the structure of society now. So, in another time and place, we'd be talking about head injuries in some other sport, caber tossing perhaps, okay? And believe me, when I was a lot younger than I am today, I used to do caber tossing. When I first started out, sometimes that huge pole, that log, gets a little unbalanced, and there's a couple times it fell in the wrong direction and clobbered me in the head, which some people say is why I'm a little dingy today. Okay. All right, so. And then remember that Dr. Pete's argument is an argumentative sleight of hand, which means like a 3-cup Monty, like where is the thing under the cup? Okay. Because Dr. Pete would have you think that Marx being the cause and being wrong are one and the same, but they're not. There's actually 4 possibilities there. So Marx could be the cause and Marx is right. Okay. Or Marx is the cause and Marx is wrong. Or Marx is not the cause and Marx is right, and Marx is not the cause and Marx is wrong. You see, so there's 4 different possibilities. Now, my argument would be that Marx is not the cause of all the troubles, as Dr. Pete says, but he's right. Because we've established that Marx is not the cause of class conflict. I hope the short history has established that, because we find mention of it more than 2,000 years ago. So 1/2 of what Dr. Pete says is already wrong. But he's hoping that you won't notice, like the con man on the street doing the 3-cup Monty, hopes that you're not going to be able to point to the right cup. But we should be. We should be able to notice where that used to be a little toy. Okay, so he puts a little toy under the cup and hopes that you won't notice where it is. Don't go anywhere. Don't hold that finger. Don't press that button. Don't go forward or backwards or turn off the computer or anything like that. Okay, so let me just say that if you like this video, here's the obligatory click like and subscribe request. Okay, please do. Okay, and if you like this sort of thing, I urge you to try out an educational website called Skillshare. Skillshare offers you all sorts of different classes. You can learn basket weaving and video editing and writing and macrame, tattooing, speeching. I'm sure glad I teaches English. Okay, speeching. Okay, speaking, public speaking, anything you want to learn. Okay, thousands and thousands of courses, and I have a link in the little text box below. And if you click it and you go to it, not only will you get one of my classes for free, and I think the one I link to is for grammar or essay writing. But not only will you get that, but you will also get access to, for a short trial period, you'll get access to thousands of other courses for free on Skillshare. For free. Doesn't cost you a thing. So you can take 1,000 courses over the free trial period and then quit, and you don't pay a penny. Okay, not 1 cent. Not 1 cent or 2 cents. Okay. Okay, so try out Skillshare, please do. And of course, you can check back in for the succeeding videos in this sequence. Dr. Peterson and Karl Marx, mano a mano contest, and I'll keep you apprised as to how that is going. Okay, so anyway, thank you very much. See you next video.
Skillshare is for designers, photographers, marketers, artists, and lifelong learners. Skillshare is for foodies, commuters, risk takers, the young, and the young at heart. It's for strategists, free spirits, purists, the bold, the curious, the characters, the makers, and the breakers. Skillshare is for everyone, an online learning community with thousands of classes to advance your career, improve the world, and pursue the work you love. What will you learn next? It all starts on Skillshare.